And so Arthur found himself trapped in a nightmare with no end. Now it is an echo, a vertigo, and the disturbing certainty that some mysteries are better left locked away.
In a forgotten stretch of old Route 66, where the asphalt was more patch than road and rusty signs pointed to nowhere, stood the Redwood Inn. It was a roadside hotel so old it seemed to have emerged directly from a dusty film noir, impregnated with the scent of decades of dust, stale tobacco, and silent despair. Its peeling walls revealed layers of faded floral wallpaper, silent witnesses to countless past stories. The vacancy neon sign flickered tiredly and erratically on the facade, a melancholic invitation that was rarely accepted. A dense, almost palpable silence weighed over the lobby, more oppressive than the thin layer of dust that covered the faded velvet furniture, the crooked paintings, and the dried-up potted plants. It was there, in this temporal and geographical limbo, that Arthur, a young man in his 20s with a freshly acquired master's degree in Gothic literature and an urgent, prosaic need to pay his bills, spent his nights as the sole receptionist. Immersed in a world of cheap books and unresolved mysteries, Arthur was not easily impressed. His journey through life, though brief, had already exposed him to a gallery of surprising human types. He had seen it all and then some at the Redwood Inn's front desk, eloping couples with guilty glances, eccentric travelers who whispered stories to themselves, and even a very strange annual convention of Victorian thimble collectors. But beneath the facade of boredom and resignation, there was something at the Redwood Inn that deeply intrigued him, a persistent anomaly in its tedious and predictable system. Room 313. On every day of his employment, through every empty, endless night he had endured at the reception, the digital record for room 313 remained stubbornly blocked, marked with an enigmatic and permanent unavailable. Never rented, never cleaned, never mentioned by the few guests who hurried past the reception. All other rooms might be vacant, their beds untouched and their showers cold. But room 313 was an island of unfathomable mystery in the vast ocean of vacancy, a black hole of curiosity on the hotel's monotonous map. Arthur's curiosity, that flame that refused to extinguish, fueled by countless hours reading suspense and horror novels during lonely nights, began to grow, becoming a silent obsession. He tried, casually at first, to ask Mrs. Bertha, the taciturn and wrinkled owner, about the room. She merely grumbled something evasive about chronic plumbing problems that were never resolved, and changed the subject with almost visible haste. The few daytime colleagues avoided the topic with an evasive, almost fearful glance and an eloquent silence. Room 313 was more than just unavailable. It was a taboo, a scar on the hotel's soul that no one dared to touch. Arthur felt there was something much deeper behind that simple notation in the system. One night, driven by an even more persistent insomnia than usual, fueled by overwhelming boredom and the promise of a mystery, Arthur made his decision. With a shiver down his spine, he picked up the old master key, a heavy, cold brass piece, worn by the touch of countless hands, which he knew by a strange instinct opened all rooms, including room 313. His heart began to beat an irregular, accelerated rhythm against his ribs, a drum of apprehension and excitement as he climbed the 3 flights of creaking wooden stairs, each step seeming to groan under his weight, echoing in the night's quietude. The 3rd-floor hallway was immersed in an almost absolute darkness. The weak, flickering light from the few wall sconces seemed to suck the color out of the environment, transforming it into a tunnel of shadows. The number 313 on the dark, heavy wooden door seemed to emit a ghostly glow under the narrow beam of his flashlight, almost inviting, almost threatening. The brass doorknob, when he touched it, was strangely supernaturally cold, as if it had spent eons frozen in time. Arthur hesitated, his breath caught in his throat, a chill running down his spine. He turned the key, feeling the metallic click resonate not just in the oppressive hallway, but in every nerve of his body. The door creaked, a prolonged lament of old wood and hinges, opening just a crack, revealing a deeper, more compact darkness than expected, an absence of light that seemed to have its own weight. There was none of the usual smell of mold, accumulated dust, or cheap disinfectant that permeated the other rooms. Only still, almost dense air, which seemed to absorb every sound, every trace of life, creating an auditory vacuum. With the flashlight held firmly in hand, his only source of comfort and light, Arthur pushed the door harder. It swung open at once, revealing the interior. What he saw challenged not only the hotel's architectural logic, but Arthur's very sanity. Room 313 was no ordinary hotel room. It was vast, monumental, incredibly larger than the space it should occupy on the hotel's blueprint, as if the laws of physics had bent around it. The walls, instead of plaster and paint, seemed to be made of an organic, shifting substance, changing, color and texture in hypnotic patterns, reflecting an ethereal light that came from no apparent lamp or window. In the center of this impossible space, almost like an entity, hovered a single object, an ancient, grand and imposing pendulum clock carved from greenish, patinated bronze, yet frighteningly devoid of hands. Instead of numbers on its face, there were indecipherable symbols, alien engravings that seemed to whisper secrets of unknown universes. Arthur took a hesitant step across the threshold, his shoes sinking slightly into the carpet that seemed to absorb his footsteps. The sound of his own footfall seemed to distort, stretching into an impossible echo that prolonged and twisted in. The dense air. He felt a sudden, overwhelming vertigo, as if the floor beneath his feet was not merely unstable, but contorting and undulating, stripping him of his sense of balance. Raising the trembling flashlight, he noticed something truly terrifying. The images projected on the walls around him. These were not static paintings or ordinary wallpaper. They were moving scenes, yet somehow static at the same time, like living, frozen photographs. He saw his own face reflected in an ethereal frame, but his face was older, covered in deep wrinkles, his eyes filled with a terror he didn't recognize, a future he didn't want to see. In another vivid painting, he saw himself desperately running down a corridor identical to the hotel's, but the corridor was engulfed in flames, the inferno licking at the ceiling. In yet another, he was seated at the Redwood Inn's reception, but his hair was white as snow, and he was staring intently at a futuristic computer screen that didn't exist in the 1950s, an impossible technology that should not have been there. Time. Room 313 was distorting time, playing with it, transforming it into a labyrinth without end or beginning. The scenes were not merely glimpses of a disturbing future, but also of pasts he had never lived, of alternate realities that merged and overlapped in a dizzying, hallucinatory temporal vertigo. The sound of his own breathing became an indistinct whisper, almost a hiss, lost in the unreal vastness of the room. He recalled the random words from old Firmino's narration, the hotel's eccentric owner in his youth, echoing in his mind like a dark warning. Vanity is like health. You only miss it when you don't have it. But here, in room 313, the lack was of time, of logic, of reality, of everything that gave meaning to existence. The very dimension seemed to disintegrate around him. Suddenly, without warning, the grand pendulum clock in the center of the room, which had previously stood inert and silent, began to swing. Slowly at first, a heavy, hypnotic movement, then faster, gaining a feverish rhythm, but without making any audible sound, as if its mechanics belonged to another dimension. The images on the walls accelerated, faces contorted into distorted expressions of agony and ecstasy. The scenarios blended into a chaotic whirlwind of colors, shapes, and emotions, a living canvas of temporal insanity. Arthur felt an irresistible pull, an invisible yet powerful force, inexorably dragging him towards the center of the room, towards the pulsating clock, as if it were a magnet. He tried to scream, a primal cry of terror, but the sound seemed to dissipate before leaving his lips, transforming into a high-pitched, almost deafening hum in his ears, a symphony of chaos. With a desperate effort bordering on agony, he managed to retreat, stumbling backward, his mind fighting against the vertigo. The door to room 313, which he had left open just a crack, groaned again and slammed shut with a dry, final thud, a sound that echoed through the dark corridor, sealing his fate. Pure panic seized Arthur. He ran, stumbling down the stairs, the steps creaking and groaning beneath his feet, his heart pounding like mad in his chest, the cold hotel air seemingly suffocating him, each gasp bringing the scent of the impossible. He didn't stop, didn't look back until he reached the reception, clinging to the worn wooden counter with all his might, cold sweat pouring profusely down his forehead, his mind in a whirlwind. He looked at the faded hotel register, at the unavailable mark next to the infamous room 313. But now, beside it, there was a new notation, almost imperceptible, as if it had been engraved there decades ago, written in a ghostly script. Property of Arthur. Room 313 was, and always would be, available to everyone else, except for him. And from that night of unspeakable terror, Arthur knew with a cold, cutting certainty that no matter where he went, no matter where he ran, he would always be trapped. In that place, in that temporal paradox, in that anomaly that had become part of his very existence. Whatever resided in or permeated room 313 had become inextricably linked to him, pulling and distorting the threads of his past, present and future into an indecipherable web of madness. And the Redwood Inn, however empty and forgotten it might, would never be the same for Arthur. After all, how do you escape a place where time no longer cares about your presence, and reality itself is merely a suggestion?
Arthur was trapped in endless torment. Room 313 became his prison, a mirror of twisted realities. Each night he wondered, did the inn whisper secrets of other souls lost in time?